The knock came after midnight, soft as a coin on wood and colder than the rain. He had given his only meal away that morning. Now a name in gold lay heavy in his hand. The man at the door smelled of other cities and wore pity like a well-cut coat. Jonathan Vale smiled as if he could buy the world with a business card. Daniel kept a faded photograph over his heart, unaware a camera had already filmed his kindness. When the lights went on, dignity would be measured, edited, and sold. And someone would learn what price mercy really has. What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The smell of rain soaked the city like an old promise. Pavement steamed where drops hit, and the street lights made the puddles burn gold for a moment before swallowing the color. Daniel woke to that smell, to the soft drum on the window, and to the small, steady ache behind his ribs that was each morning's first demand. The room was thin, one bed, one crooked chair, a suitcase used as a table, and the window looked out over a patch of brick roofs and the distant hum of a city that did not belong to him. Daniel moved carefully, as if sound could break more than sleep. He tied a battered shoelace, smoothed the collar of a jacket that had once been black and now knew every prayer for warmth. His hands were quick and sure. They had to be. There was a rhythm in those hands that spoke of small, exact labors. The way he bent a nail straight, the way he folded old receipts into neat piles, the way he made a sandwich so it looked bigger than it was. He could stretch a coin until it told a lie about plenty. He kept a photograph taped to the edge of the suitcase. It had been taken years ago in sunlight. Two people, smiling, arms thrown around a child with a gap-toothed grin. The child was him. The photograph was not a map. It was a weight. He lifted it now, as if to find out what it might say, but there were no words. There was only the light on the faces and the small, certain fact that someone had once believed in the future he carried. Outside, a bus coughed and moved away, leaving a trail of cold breath. Daniel tucked the photo into his jacket, the way one hides a secret from the weather. He boiled water, the kettle's thin whistle, like a voice from another room. He made coffee that was mostly water and a little memory, and he fumbled a slice of bread into a pan. The bread hissed. He closed his eyes for a moment and let the heat answer what his mouth could not. He did not look in the mirror. He already knew the photograph's consequence in his face. Lines where patience had been, a softness around the mouth that had once been full of laughter. He left the flat with the sandwich wrapped tight and a paper bag with coins balanced inside. He paused on the stair, landing, and listened. 2 doors down, a radio played a hymn low and sure. There was a name, Thomas, sung into the air with such steadiness that Daniel imagined the singer holding a hand over a wound. Names could be anchors. Daniel liked that. He liked the idea that a single word could stop drift. The city was awake and hard. Daniel walked through a market that smelled of citrus and diesel. Vendors shouted in a language of bargains. The rain rinsed the colors sharp. People moved as if they had rehearsed their indifference. Heads down, hands in pockets, shields of paper and umbrella. Daniel kept his head down, too, but his eyes moved. They cataloged things quickly. An old dog sleeping with one ear folded, a child with a balloon that bobbed like a small sun, a woman arranging flowers in a bucket with care that made petals into promises. He worked a short shift at a small cafe on the corner, the kind of place where the coffee was honest and the pastries were lighter than they looked. Daniel's job was to clean, to bring in trays, to fold napkins into the shape the owner liked. He did it with the air of someone who treated small things as if they mattered. The owner, a woman named Ruth, with a laugh that started at her toes, trusted him. That trust was a fragile coin in Daniel's pocket, rare and very useful. There was a way Daniel walked through tasks that said he would give more than he kept. He had learned to do that because once he had been kept. The memory of being kept was a room with a locked door. He knew where the key had been, But he also knew it had gone to someone who did not answer anymore. So he kept moving, letting kindness live in his hands rather than his expectations. It made him steady. It made him lonely in a soft way, like music heard through a wall. He noticed the old couple at the door before he heard their voices. They moved with the slow, certain steps of people who had a long story of mornings and nights. The man's shoulders were broad but curved by time. The woman's hair was white in a circle around her face, like a halo someone had forgotten. They did not look at the menu. They looked at each other, and there was something tender in that look that cut through the cafe noise like a knife through fabric. When the bell above the door rang, the cafe made a small, bright sound. Daniel watched them order tea, their coins counted with the care of people who had learned to measure life in small gestures. They spoke in voices like worn thread. He saw the woman set her hands on the cup when it came, as if heat could stitch what had been lost. She smiled at a memory, and the smile made her face glow. Daniel's impulse was a small thing and immediate. He wanted to give. It was not a grand gesture. It was the kind of thing that asks for nothing, like keeping a chair for someone who looks tired. He set down a plate he had been carrying and let his fingers brush the sugar jar. For a moment his hands hesitated. He counted the coins in his head. There were not enough to fill his own stomach for the day. He thought of the photograph in his jacket. He thought of the kettle at home. The thought of a future he could not yet reach sat like a stone in his throat. He put the plate on the table for the old couple and, without a word, left a small envelope folded under the salt shaker. It contained what he could spare, a coin and a promise, for your shelter. He did not watch them open it. He moved back to his work as if nothing had happened. That was Daniel's way. Small revolutions made quiet. An impartial, I might have described the scene differently. A young man with too thin clothes slipping a coin into another's pocket. The city carrying on regardless. The couple none the wiser. But the truth was in the way the woman's hand paused above the envelope and trembled. The man looked at Daniel and then at the envelope. His eyes were sharp, the color of late autumn leaves. He mouthed a thank you that the noise swallowed. The thank you landed somewhere warm inside Daniel and stayed. There was a notice on the cafe wall, a small poster about a charity dinner, a name printed in bold that one would not expect to find in a place like this. Jonathan Vale, philanthropist. The poster seemed to belong to another life, the kind with suits and speeches, with handshakes polished to a shine. Daniel read the name and felt an unfamiliar thing. Curiosity edged with a distant dream. He did not know Jonathan Vale. He did not know billionaires. But names work on the mind like seeds. They land and wait. By the time Daniel finished his shift, the rain had stopped, leaving the city scrubbed and bright. He wrapped the sandwich from the cafe in extra paper, because it was his small mercy for the day. When he stepped outside, the old couple sat on the curb beneath a street lamp, sharing the plate he had set down. They spoke softly. A child ran by, splashing puddles like small drums. A car passed, and the windows fogged with its own secrets. Daniel walked home with his hands empty, but for the photograph and the sandwich. He felt lighter, but lightness was a new thing that frightened him a little. It felt like a borrowed coat. He wondered, not for the first time, whether small kindnesses could change the course of a life. The city did not answer. It only gave him the smell of wet earth and the distant clatter of a train. As he climbed the narrow stairs to his flat, he heard a knock on the landing. He paused. The knock had the kind of purpose that carries an unknown weight. He opened the door to find a man in a coat that looked too fine for this building. The man's face was not unkind. His eyes were careful and cold at the same time, like someone who had built a house out of mirrors. Daniel, the man said, and the name fit the landing like a key into a lock. Daniel's mouth made a small sound. He did not know the man. He did not expect company. The man held out a folded card with letters stamped in a hush of gold. Jonathan Vale. Daniel's heart moved in a way that was both ordinary and enormous. Outside, the city folded itself into night. The narrator watched Daniel take the card. It was a simple motion. It was the start of something that would ask him to stretch further than a sandwich, to risk the small certainties he had gathered like coins. The card was only paper, but paper sometimes carries the shape of a door. Daniel, who had given his small meal away without thinking, now balanced a name in his hand as if it were a question. He could not know, not yet, what the next knock would demand. He only knew the warmth of the photograph against his chest and the taste of coffee on his tongue, and those were enough to set his feet moving toward whatever the night would bring. The card in Daniel's palm felt too thin to be real and too heavy to ignore. Jonathan Vale, 3 words pressed in gold like the name belonged to sunlight or steel, sat there between his fingers. The knock had come like a second heartbeat, one that did not match the rhythm Daniel had learned to live with. It did not belong to his careful, frugal life. It belonged to another map. When the man in the fine coat left, he left the scent of expensive tobacco and something colder, like winter air caught in a glass box. Daniel closed the door and slid the card into his jacket, as if tucking a secret against his chest. Outside, the stairwell hummed with the small lives of people returning to their rooms, muffled radios, the murmur of a late argument, laughter that was quick and brittle. Daniel pressed his back against the door and let himself breathe. The photograph in his jacket warmed his palm. He stood too long in the hallway. When he finally moved, his steps were measured. The city seemed to notice him now in a different way, as if he wore a light that he had not had before. The cafe had closed for the night, but Ruth waited on the stoop with a broom in her hand and that laugh that began at her toes. She saw the card and lifted an eyebrow. "Jonathan Vale," she said. The name slid from her like an old coin. "He was here," Daniel said. Ruth's broom paused. She had lived long enough to know when a breeze carried trouble. "You go." "No. He asked me to come tonight. He says he wants to talk. Said he saw me at the cafe." Daniel's voice folded itself small. "He gave me this." Ruth's eyes narrowed. For a moment she was not the woman with easy laughter, but someone who had watched windstorms from behind curtains. "People like him don't give cards like that for nothing," she said. "Not in this part of town." The narrator moved closer then, with a voice that cared and a voice that did not. Up close it felt like a friend whispering, "Do not be foolish." From a distance it sounded like an observation. A choice had been set before him, and choices change paths. Daniel folded the card and rubbed the edge between his fingers. He thought of the couple at the table, of Peter's hands folded over tea, Agnes's throat working with a small laugh. He thought of the coin in the envelope he had slipped under the salt shaker. It had been nothing, and therefore everything. He went home and could not sleep. The city outside his window settled into a soundscape of distant traffic and a dog that barked as if to remind the moon that animals kept better promises than people. Daniel replayed the gentleman's face in fragments, the careful smile, the eyes that did not quite smile. There was a precision in those eyes that felt like a measurement. Jonathan Vale knew how to look at someone and count what they were worth without making a sound. Morning did not bring answers. It brought instead the same small chores and bigger hunger. At the cafe, Daniel worked with the practiced efficiency of someone who cleans the edges of other people's lives. The old couple arrived, their steps deliberate and slower than before, as if time had given them smaller gifts. Daniel watched them settle into the same corner booth. Under the table, Agnes's fingers brushed something. She looked up, meeting Daniel's eyes, and there was a depth in that look that spoke of gratitude without words. Before noon, a man in a suit came through the cafe door. He wore a pin in the shape of a simple symbol, the same tiny crest Daniel had noticed on the edge of the card. He sat at the counter and watched the place with a businessman's patience. Daniel felt the air change. The room had warm corners, and this man had sharp edges. When he left, he folded a napkin and left behind a slip of paper with a name, Vale Foundation, Community Outreach. Tonight, 7. Dress as you wish. The notice landed like a pebble in a still pond. Ripples moved toward Daniel's heart. He found himself telling no one but Ruth. She scrubbed a plate and listened in that quiet way that carried neither judgment nor indulgence. "You want to go," she said finally. He did not know. The card was both a chance and a question. It might be a door wide enough to step through or a trap with a net at the bottom. As the impartial voice would note, doors are ambiguous things. They can lead to kitchens and to cliffs. Daniel thought of his photograph, of the laughter that had once belonged to a family. He thought of the coin he had given and of the way the woman at the table had breathed when she found it. He wanted to be useful. He wanted to be seen as more than someone who stretched coins. At 3, while the light went soft and the city smelled like bread and rain, Daniel found an envelope under his door. It was unmarked, plain, the kind of brown that kept secrets. He opened it with hands that were steadier than his heart. Inside was a photograph, old and out of focus at the edges, of his own street, but not his window, another window, with a figure watching. A note, written in a hand that insisted on neatness, read, "We notice small things. Keep doing what you do." No signature. No name. Just a sentence that could be kindness or surveillance. The narrator stepped back and offered a clear-eyed remark. Someone was paying attention. The close voice added, "You should be careful." Daniel turned the photograph over. There was an ink smudge in one corner, the faint remnant of a crest like the one on the card, a small design like a coin stamped twice. The coincidence was a shadow that grew teeth. That night he dressed in the jacket that had once been black. He folded his sandwich into his pocket, a small talisman. The city at dusk looked like a painting people had tried to clean, but left their fingerprints on. He walked to the address printed on the slip, feeling as if each step might shift a scale. The foundation building rose like a new island. Its glass reflected lights in neat bands. Men and women passed him with the ease of people certain where they were going. Daniel felt, for the first time in a long while, like someone moving toward a place that might change him. In the foyer, a woman took his name and smiled with a smile that had been taught. She led him through a corridor hung with pictures of hands that built hospitals and ribbons that promisingly looped. He was shown to a room where people chatted with the comfortable rhythm of people used to fine wine and soft chairs. They looked at him with curious eyes, like travelers interested in the map of him. Jonathan Vale arrived late, as the main lights of storms arrived. He did not move with haste. He moved with the sense of someone who had planned the weather. When Vale spoke, his voice was low and without flash. "Daniel," he said, "I wanted to meet the man who could make a small sacrifice without being asked." The words landed on Daniel like something both commendation and examination. "We are doing a project," Vale continued. "We collect small acts. We show the world what kindness looks like. We reward it. We build stories that people can follow, people who give." There was an offer in the way he said it, and a ledger hidden behind the words. Daniel listened. Gratitude warmed the room for a moment, like the light in a glass lantern. Yet when Vale spoke of rewards, there was a subtle shift, a quiet balance placed between help and ownership. He offered money, assistance, and a place to work. He also asked that Daniel let him tell the story of the old couple, Peter and Agnes, on camera. He wanted their faces and their words. He wanted permission. It was a small request that felt like a chain with a clasp no one noticed at first. The impartial voice noted the exchange as a transaction, story for sustenance. The tenderness voice said, "When you give your life to another's telling, be careful who holds the pen." Daniel agreed, because hunger is a persuasive voice, and because he had a hope that this would lead to more than a sandwich. He agreed, and in that quiet assent planted a seed that could later grow into a tree or a snare. He thought he was stepping toward light. He could not know yet whether light would warm him or burn him. He left the building with Vale's card burning in his pocket, like a coin too hot to hold. On the curb outside, Agnes held Daniel's hand for a moment as if to thumb the seam of his kindness. Peter's eyes were thankful and sharp in a way that looked like intelligence. They did not ask for anything more. Daniel felt the promise of a different life, sudden, precarious, bright. He also felt, like a draft under a door, the sense that someone else had moved parts on a board without telling him which pieces would fall. The inciting thing was not just the card or the photograph or the invitation. It was the change in Daniel's center of gravity. A tiny shift, a tilt toward something else. The narrator watched him walk away and thought, choices have consequences. Sometimes those consequences are paid in unexpected coin. The close voice whispered, keep your photograph where you can find it in the dark. Keep the people you love closer. There will be a time when you must decide whom to trust. Daniel learned quickly how to keep small things close. He learned how to fold silence so it did not wrinkle his face. That morning after the Vail event, he moved through the cafe like a man who had been given a map with an unlabeled X. His hands were steady, but his eyes lingered on faces in a new way, as if he were trying to read a sentence that had lost its last line. Ruth watched him from the sink. She had washed more dishes than she could count and had seen people wear hope like new coats only to take them off in the rain. You look like you slept with your shoes on, she said, and her voice was warm as always, but there was a thin line of worry in it. Did something happen? Daniel set down a cup. He tried to explain the Vail invitation without making it sound like either a miracle or a trap. They filmed Peter and Agnes, he said finally. They want to tell their story. I said yes. Ruth dried her hands slowly and studied him. She had gray at her temples that she refused to color and a laugh that used to break at inconvenient times. Are you sure you want this? She asked. People with money give us things. Sometimes the thing is a ladder. Sometimes the thing is a chain. Daniel thought about that. He thought about the coin in the envelope, about the photograph on his jacket, about the soft way Agnes had held his hand. I want to help them, he said. Maybe it will help me, too. Maybe it will change something. The narrator observed without softening the edges. Change is a compound. It mixes with fear and with desire, and it often asks more than it promises. Daniel wanted to be generous and to be saved at once. That wish lived in the same place as the ache behind his ribs. Peter and Agnes had their own language of touch. Peter would smooth Agnes's hair the way a man smooths a map. Agnes would laugh at the wrong times and then apologize with tears. They had been married for 40 years and had learned to hide certain things beneath habits. Peter, in particular, had a look that could sharpen into distrust. He had been a foreman at a factory once and knew how to measure a man's intent in the set of his shoulders. When Vail's camera crew arrived the first week, Peter sat forward in his chair like a man braced for weather. We do not want gifts that come with names, he told Daniel in a low voice after the filming. People like a story when it is clean. They like pity when it is neat. We are not neat. Daniel felt the weight of that like a hand on his shoulder. They said it will help, he replied. They said they will make a fund, pay rent, fix your boiler. Peter shut his eyes for a beat. It is not help I am afraid of, he said. It is what they will do with our faces. People will watch and then forget. They will say they remember our names and then use those names in other rooms. The close narrator whispered, Peter's fear was not about money. It was about being spoken for. His life had been a series of small choices. He did not want the story to be taken and reshaped into something that belonged to someone else. He loved Agnes, and he loved the quiet dignity they had built. He feared losing the shape of that dignity. While the filming went on, Daniel found his name appearing in conversations he had not planned. People at the market pointed at him in ways that had nothing to do with malice. They simply noted that he might be moving into another currency of life. Some looked with curiosity, some with suspicion. A young man he had once known as a neighbor, Michael, stopped him in the street. You're with Vail now? Michael said. He spoke like someone tasting a rumor. Are you going to change, Dan? Are you going to forget the streets? Daniel felt an old lesson in Michael's tone, that anyone who changed currency risked being accused of betrayal by the people they left behind. He said no more softly than he felt. I won't forget. Ruth, later that day, locked the back door and sat opposite Daniel. The light through the tiny window broke into a square on the floor. There's something I haven't told you, she said. The words were small, but they dropped in the air like a stone in a pond. Years ago, before I opened this place, I worked in a foundation's kitchen. It was much like this, only with fewer smiles and more rules. I left because I could not stand how they decided who deserved help. Daniel looked at her. Did you know Vale? Ruth's jaw tightened. I knew his people. He sends men who wear soft faces and hard hands. They talk about charity like it's a ledger. She pushed a cup across the table to him as if anchoring herself. If he is sincere, good. If not, keep your eyes open. The narrator noted the pattern. People who had seen the inside of generosity's machinery were often wound a little differently. They respected help and feared its strings. Ruth's warning was both a shield and a prophecy. Daniel took it in and tucked it like a small, necessary thing into his heart. At night, Daniel lay awake and stared at the photograph in his jacket. He thought of his mother and the way she had left once, not with a door slam, but with a long, quiet packing of reasons. He imagined telling her, if she would listen, about the card with gold letters and the man who had bowed and smiled. He also imagined a scene he did not want to admit. Himself later, standing where Vale stood, talking about collecting kindness, as if people's lives were coins to be displayed. There was another strand to the web forming, more subtle. Agnes began to complain of forgetfulness. She misplaced her spectacles, then her words. Peter joked about it at first, but his jokes wore thin. He started to keep a small notebook in his pocket with names and dates. When he and Daniel spoke, Peter's voice sometimes hit a tremor that he did not let anyone see. I used to remember everything, he said once, almost to himself. Now sometimes I misplace the day. I misplace the right answer. Daniel felt something like guilt and like responsibility. He had climbed into a role he had not fully chosen. The idea that Agnes might be losing pieces of herself added a sharpness to his wish to help. He had thought the project would be a ladder. Now it also looked like a raft. He imagined a future where cameras watched Agnes blink and call names wrong. The thought made his palms sweat. Vale, meanwhile, moved through the project with the composure of someone who had rehearsed compassion. He visited on certain days, always polite, always impeccably timed. He asked about small things, the brand of tea the couple liked, the music they listened to as young people. He spoke to Peter about the past, as if he were airlifting memories into the present. Daniel found it pleasant and eerie at the same time. One evening Vale stopped Daniel as he left the cafe. We are preparing something bigger, Vale said. A public piece. It will be honest. It will also be powerful. He looked at Daniel and added, with a softness that was exact, you are key to this. Daniel nodded, because he wanted to please and because he wanted to believe. Then Vale paused and said, there are people who will resist. People who think their work is better done quietly. I need someone who will stand and say, we chose to help. The narrator watched Vale smile and thought of a coin that had been hot in Daniel's pocket. Offers that sound like trust can be a way to test people. This sentence, I need someone who will stand and say, we chose to help, was both compliment and recruitment. Daniel took it in and felt the edges of a role forming. He wanted to be useful. He wanted to be brave. He did not yet understand what bravery would demand of him. Inside each choice lived a history. For Daniel, the history was his photograph and the hollow where answers should have been. For Peter, it was the dignity of a life lived without being rearranged by others. For Ruth, it was a memory of letting go. For Vale, perhaps, it was the hunger to shape stories. The relationships bent toward one another like light through a glass. Blessings and shadows mingled. The drama was unfolding, quiet as a tide. Each character flexed, waiting to see which waves would wash them clean and which would pull them under. The alley behind the cafe smelled of wet cardboard and the city's tired smoke. Daniel paused under a flickering lamp because the light made the wet stones look like something polished, something that remembered itself as glass. He had been thinking of nothing in particular, of the way Agnes had laughed that afternoon, of the small, neat way Peter kept his pocketbook. The night brought the weight of things he could not yet change. Michael stepped out from the shadow with the routine ease of a man who had practiced the shape of guilt. He had been a neighbor once, a face in the market, the sort of person who traded jokes for bread. Tonight, he wore a jacket that tried too hard to be new. "Dan," Michael said, and the word landed like a pebble. "Can we talk?" Daniel knew that voice. It had been words used in morning deals, in nonsense arguments about who owed whom a favor. He followed Michael into a smaller space between two buildings, where the wind made a slow, cold sound like the turning of a page. Michael looked at the ground before he looked at Daniel. He thumbed the cuff of his sleeve, the way people do when they want to move on from what they are about to say. "I shouldn't have done it," he began. "What?" Daniel asked simply. His throat was dry. He tried to keep his voice steady because there had been enough tremors in his life that quick motions made him dizzy. Michael's mouth opened and closed. "It was me who left that photograph. The envelope. I planted it by your door." The words were small, but they hit like stones thrown in quick succession. Daniel felt the floor tilt. "You what?" He heard something in his own voice that was more surprising than angry. The photograph. The private little card that had felt like a surprise from fate. He saw the image again, the window with a figure watching, and realized how much he had trusted the world to be odd but honest. Michael put his hands up, a pleading gesture. "Vale's people hired me. They paid me to see who would act. They wanted someone who would give without asking. I followed you for days. I watched you at the cafe. I saw you give a coin. I planted the picture to nudge you. I'm sorry, Dan. I didn't know it would go this far." Daniel's mind turned like a clock that had been dropped. The small kindness he'd given had been watched, measured, nudged into a story someone else would write. He remembered the warmth in his chest when the old woman had held his hand, a certain soft gravity he'd felt. That warmth now tasted like a coin with a notch in it. "Why?" Daniel asked. The question was simple but heavy. He had expected a dozen reasons: foolishness, curiosity, money. But Michael's face told of smaller, meaner things. "They wanted real," Michael said. "They wanted the camera to catch something pure. Vale, he likes that word. Pure. He pays people to make moments pure. He calls it curating kindness. I took the money. I told myself it was just a job. I didn't think," he broke off. The narrator watched Daniel stand there with a face that did not quite look like a mask anymore. Up close, the truth sounded like a voice in a room where someone had opened a window and let a wind rush through. Michael's betrayal felt elemental. A neighbor had turned a private kindness into a product. Daniel's hands trembled. He thought of Ruth and her broom. The way she had warned him a voice could be a ledger. He thought of Vale's lights and the pictures of hands on the foundation's walls. He felt suddenly as if he had been a piece in a game he had not agreed to join. "You used me," he said finally, and the words were small and cold. "You used them." Michael swallowed hard. "I didn't know they would press things like they did. They had teams. They pushed for the public peace. They said it would help with rent, with the boiler." I thought he could not finish. "You were the one who left the envelope," Daniel said, more a statement than accusation now. The facts lined up like coins on a table. "You told me to come. You told me they saw me at the cafe." Michael's face broke into something like shame. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry, Dan. I didn't want to hurt anyone. I just wanted to get out of where I was." They pay, and you don't ask questions. They said I could pay my debts. I thought it would be small. Daniel felt anger grow slow and thick like a storm forming at sea. It was not only the betrayal that cut. It was the quiet selfishness that made the betrayal possible. He remembered Michael's jokes and the beers they had shared. He had trusted him in a way people trust a neighbor who remembers their birthday. Why would they do that? Daniel asked, because he needed a target beyond Michael, a place to put his hot confusion. Michael looked at him with eyes that shone wetly in the alley light. They want stories. They trade in them. They collect them, and then they sell the idea of kindness. They put it on screens and call it proof that they help. Vale wanted you because you would give without asking, and because Peter and Agnes were already there. He wanted someone like you to be the bridge. The air between them went cold and thin. Daniel thought of the old couple feeding on their plate beneath a street lamp, of Agnes's laugh that had seemed like a bright small thing. He felt a sudden, dull fear that their lives had been braided into someone else's gains. He went to Peter's flat without thinking. The corridor smelled of boiled cabbage and a faint medicinal scent that made him think of old movies. Peter opened the door with the puzzled politeness of a man who does not expect visitors after dark. Daniel. Peter's voice was cautious. He shifted in the doorway, as if the light might hide something. You all right? Daniel did not answer at once. He studied the room. In a small box on the table were papers, the sort of stack that the camera crew had asked them to bring. He realized suddenly that he had seen Peter carry that box on filming day. He moved to it with a single, sharp motion. He opened the box. On top lay a document with the Vale Foundation letterhead. The paper was thin and smelled faintly of printer ink and something cleaned. There was a signature scrawled at the bottom, and a stamp that made Vale's crest look official and irrevocable. Daniel picked up the page with hands that did not belong to him. The words were simple and legal. A release, granting full rights to the Vale Foundation to use the couple's likeness, story, and any recordings in perpetuity. The clause read in small text, Vale Foundation reserves the right to edit, reframe, and distribute content as deemed appropriate for campaigns, publications, and third-party partnerships. Peter watched him as if he were watching the weather. We signed it, Peter said softly. We had to. Agnes needed the medicine. The room narrowed. Daniel's chest felt like someone had put a stone there. He had thought Peter's fear was about pride. Now he saw how it was also about survival. The betrayal was not clean. It was a compromise made at a particular hunger's edge. You let them take your voice for a promise of medicine, Daniel said, and the words were both an accusation and a plea. He felt sudden anger at the world and at the cruelty of choices that forced a man to trade his story for aspirin. Peter's hand closed around the back of a chair. You would have done the same if you looked at her and she forgot your name. What else was I to do? His voice was stripped thin and raw. I wanted to fix the boiler. I wanted heat. I signed to get a small fund for heating and a bit for the pills. I did not think they'd make a show of us. I did not want this. Daniel wanted to be furious. He wanted to storm out and throw the papers into the street and shout at the moon. Instead, he sat down on a chair and let his anger fold inward like a knife. He looked at Peter and then at Agnes, who was asleep in an armchair with a shawl over her knees. The light fell on the wrinkle of her face and made her look like someone who had been folded by 1,000 loving hands. The narrator stayed close and cold. Betrayal often grows from need. The one who is betrayed is often not only a victim, but also a witness to the choices that desperation forces. Michael had betrayed Daniel by manufacturing a moment. Peter had, in his own way, betrayed the idea that dignity could be left unbought. Vale had arranged the stage where these choices were made. Daniel folded the release paper back into the box with hands that trembled. The paper was not paper now. It was the shape of a contract that changed the air in the room. He thought of his photograph and of the way Michael had planted it to watch him. He thought of Vale's camera, the way it could turn a small kindness into a banner. Outside, the night kept its slow breath. Inside, Daniel felt the world split into two rooms. Before, he had thought kindness was a thing one gave freely. After, he saw that kindness could be curated and sold, that promises could be made with claws hidden behind them. He slid the box closed and walked to the door. He did not know what he would do next. He only knew that the trust he had carried in his chest was now a thin, fragile thing. As he left, Peter called after him, voice small and raw. "Don't let them make you play their song, Daniel." Daniel paused on the landing and looked back at the couple's small room, lit like a stage they had not wanted to be on. He felt the sting of betrayal pressed right into his skin, and beneath it, a deeper ache, a restless, stubborn thing that would not let him walk away. The night swallowed his figure, and the lamp blinked once, like an eye closing on a truth. After the alley, nothing felt the same color. Small things had taken on a new edge. Coins looked colder. The cafe's windows seemed to glare, and the photograph in Daniel's jacket felt heavier than paper. The release in Peter's box had a clause that could become a blade. It sat in his head like a repeating sound. He understood, suddenly and terribly, that a story could be edited until the edges no longer matched the person it came from. Days sped by with the uncomfortable speed of an oncoming storm. Vale's team moved as if nothing had shifted. Cameras arrived at odd hours. Lights were tested in the early morning, and a production assistant with tired eyes asked Daniel if he would write a short piece about why he helped the couple. "We want to center your voice," she said, polite and efficient, as if arranging flowers. Her clipboard felt like a list of things to be arranged, not lives to be handled gently. Daniel hesitated. He found himself answering in clipped sentences, then walking home in the raw light, thinking of the pills Peter bought with the fund and of Agnes's hand on Daniel's when she had thanked him. Ruth watched him, the broom leaning against her hip like a sentinel. She had a way of saying little that meant much. "You look as if you're carrying the weather," she said one afternoon. "I don't know what I am carrying," he admitted. "I thought they would help. I thought it would be small. But the release, it lets them change things." Ruth nodded. "Contracts are teeth. People who hand them out rarely give them back." She tapped the table, slow and deliberate. "It's not just your face they want. It's the shape of your eyes." The impartial voice observed that Daniel had a choice: to let others shape the story and possibly give Peter and Agnes what they needed, or to resist and perhaps lose the small safety valve the project offered. The close voice pressed harder. "If you refuse, will you be betraying the couple who signed because they had no choice?" When Agnes's cough worsened, the stakes tightened. She woke one night with breath like a bell struggling to toll. Daniel ran to the pharmacy and bought lozenges and a cheap nebulizer with a small fund veil had wired to a community account. He set it up and watched her chest rise and fall, the shawl over her knees moving with each breath. Peter pressed his hand to her forehead like a man measuring temperature with fingers that had once touched heavy machinery and soft faces. They had traded dignity for medicine, and the medicine worked in a literal way. Her cough calmed, her color returned, but the price was written in the paper they had signed. The production's public release date crept toward them in bold, a light on a stage. Vale announced a live stream event meant to showcase everyday heroes. Flyers showed smiling faces with bold type, their story, a community reclaimed. Daniel read it and felt the words clip at his breathing. He was listed as a collaborator, a young man whose small act of kindness would inspire millions. The phrase "inspire millions" twined in his head with a clause that allowed edits and partnerships. Voices outside the Vale orbit began to stir. A local blogger wrote a piece that called the campaign performative philanthropy and posted images of the release clause in a grainy, sarcastic tone. The comments were sharp. Some praised the help. Others accused Peter and Agnes of selling their pain. The cafe filled with murmurs like uneasy birds. Michael stopped by with downcast eyes and a bag of bread, as if to say sorry without saying the word. People Daniel had known his whole life looked at him, now, in ways that made him taste copper. One evening, as fog wrapped the street in a gray sheet, Daniel received a call that twisted the night. The producer from Vale's team asked if he would attend a taped interview on the Foundation's channel. "They think you have a strong narrative," she said. "We'd like you to tell the opening. You can say what you feel." Daniel felt the question like a door closing behind him. If he accepted, his voice would launch the campaign. People who watched might give. They might click and share and donate. But Vale's team would also hold the final cut. He thought of Peter's release and how it let editors make decisions about tone and focus. Even the best intentions could be rerouted into something less honest when framed by cameras and sponsors. He went to Peter and Agnes and found them sitting by the window. Agnes hummed a tune she could not finish, like a phrase missing its last note. Peter had his notebook open and was writing dates. They asked Daniel to speak. Peter said, without looking up. His voice was steady, but not free of caution. "They want a short interview. They say it will reach more people." Daniel felt the pressure of the air between them. "If I do it, I will ask that certain things remain as we say them," he said. "I will ask them to show your faces as you are, not like an image in a brochure." Peter smiled with small, tired humor. "You will ask them, and they will blink kindly. You will make demands, and they will nod. And then you will see the version they want. They have other rooms, Daniel. They have editors who like tidy arcs." He put a hand on Agnes's shawl. "But if you don't, we might not get the funds. The rent man is not patient." Daniel felt a rawness in his chest. There were two brutal truths. One, that Peter and Agnes needed help now, and two, that the help had strings that could tighten without notice. He began to understand betrayal not as a single grand act, but as a slow erosion, like water finding its way through mortar. He met Vale in a conference room with glass that looked over the city. Vale's smile had the exactness of one who had learned to use light well. "We need you," Vale told him, hands flat on the table. "You are the honest bridge between the story and the audience. People respond to authenticity. You give them that." Daniel wanted to ask about Michael, about the planted photograph, about the claws. The questions formed like small, sharp beads. They hung in his throat until he could not swallow them down. "What about the release?" he asked finally, voice small and steady. Vale's expression shifted almost imperceptibly. He leaned back. "Standard practice," he said. "It ensures we can tell the story without legal friction. We can place it where it will do the most good." There was a pause he meant as reassurance, and a pause that cut like a scissor. "And the photographers who planted things," Daniel began. "We don't condone deception," Vale interrupted, perfectly calm. "But we do sometimes use social techniques to highlight needs. Think of it as curating attention." His words were smooth and chewy, as if designed to be swallowed easily. The meaning slipped by like oil. Daniel left the building with a thick purse of choices pressing at his ribs. He had the power to step up and give a speech that could change their winter, or to step back and risk the couple's security. He realized that every choice he made would not be just his own. It would ripple outward into the lives of people who had trusted him. That night, he sat on his narrow bed and took out the photograph of his family. He stared at the child who had once smiled easily into the sun. "What do you want me to do?" he whispered to a picture. No picture answered. The narrator's close voice pressed in with tenderness. "You cannot save everyone, but you can choose how you save them." The impartial voice noted that morality is often a ledger of losses. Sleep arrived like something stolen, and in the gray hours before dawn, Daniel dreamed of a stage where people applauded at the image of hands giving, not the people who had been given for. He woke with his decision heavy as a stone. The live stream was scheduled for the next week. He had 7 days to find a way to protect Peter and Agnes's dignity without stealing their medicine. He had to decide whether his yes would be a bridge or a leash. The city outside moved on, indifferent and patient, and Daniel, who had once measured his life in coins, now measured it in moments left to choose. The studio looked like daylight chopped into pieces. Lights hung like planets above the stage, and cameras moved with the slow confidence of people who had rehearsed the future. The live stream banner glowed. Everyday heroes live. Viewers scrolled in the margins of Daniel's life by the thousands. The air smelled of coffee and warm cables, and the sound was an ocean of low voices and quiet direction from people with earpieces. Daniel stood at the edge of the stage with his hands folded so hard his fingers hurt. His heart was a small drum under his ribs. He could feel Peter's note in his pocket, Ruth's worried face at the sink, Michael's eyes in the alley. He had rehearsed nothing. The truth did not bend to practice. The close narrator breathed with him. This is the place where promises are either kept or stripped bare. Jonathan Vail took the podium with a smile that had been measured in boardrooms. His suit caught the light and held it like a promise. He began with the words polished for applause. "We bring light to the quiet corners," he said. "We collect stories so the world will remember." The crowd clapped because that was the correct response. Cameras found Daniel and lingered on his face like searchlights. Then something unexpected and raw unfolded. Michael walked through the side curtain and into the pool of light. He looked smaller than Daniel remembered, as if the months of his choices had cost him inches of himself. The director's hand flew up in a soft panic. The earpieces clicked. Vail's smile remained, but lost a fraction of warmth. Michael faced the main camera. He did not hide. "I planted the photograph," he said. His voice was thin, but steady enough to carry. "I was paid to nudge the moment. I lied. I am sorry." A ripple moved through the auditorium like wind across a field. The impartial voice stated the facts, a planted prompt. The close voice said, "The air tastes like copper now." Vail stepped forward with an immediate readiness, the practiced man who knew how to knead crisis into a statement. "We do not condone deception," he began carefully. But his words found teeth. A producer, Claire, the woman with the tired eyes who had once asked Daniel to write in his own voice, did not let the sentence finish. She moved to the soundboard, thumbed a key, and the large screen behind Vail flickered. On it played footage that had not been meant for public eyes. A backroom conversation with microphones on a table, a figure in shadow saying, "We need something that looks real." There was a shake of a hand, and then a clip of a pale man, Michael, being given a packet of cash and instructions to place a photograph. There were camera angles rehearsed, words suggested, small manipulations that fit like needle and thread through a costume. The audience inhaled as one. The neutral narrator noted coldly, "Evidence changes the game." The close voice whispered, "Trust fractures where the light reveals the hinges." Vail's face hardened. He tried to spin, to call it strategy, to say the method was in service of the message. But the image on the screen cut through the rhetoric. The fun today, the release clause quietly signed, the careful rights to edit, reframe, and distribute, all of it collected into a single simple picture. Their kindness had been curated. Daniel felt something both terrible and cleansing. He stepped forward because his feet had begun moving before his mind had decided. He lifted the piece of paper from his pocket, the release he had found in Peter's box, and held it up so the cameras could read the legal lines in their crisp type. The document glinted under the lights like a coin faced up. "You made them sign away their voice for pills," Daniel said, and his voice did not crack. It was cut. "You turned Agnes and Peter into a campaign. You paid a man to make my kindness look staged. You sold their lives and called it charity." From the back of the room, Peter stood. He looked smaller than on the screen. He had the same slow dignity, but his hands shook with something like fear and a new kind of clarity. "I signed because my wife was dying on cold nights," he said. His voice was roughened by nights of worry. "We had to have heat. We had to have the medicine. I did what I thought I must do." The rawness in him made the crowd hush. Vale tried to press back. He offered the rehearsed defense. They had helped. Money had been given. Millions watched and gave. The producer, Claire, was not finished. She had more footage. She played a fragment of a recorded meeting where Vale's executive suggested packaging Agnes's memory lapses as heart-tugging vulnerability to maximize donations. The wording was blunt and terrible. We will frame the forgetfulness as moving and redemptive. The room smelled suddenly of old paper and fear. Sponsors shuffled on their phones. A murmur of outrage rose in the chat that streamed across the screen. Accusations, disbelief, and then a steady demand for accountability. The impartial voice observed that institutions crumble quicker under the glare of evidence than they do under mere accusation. Vale's smile left him. He pivoted, and the air changed from performance to defense. We helped them, he said. We raised funds. We gave support. He looked directly at Daniel then, as if the two of them had been the castaways of a single storm. You could have refused the cameras. You could have said no. Daniel felt the old bone-deep ache. He had chosen, and choice carried its own weight. I did not know, he said. I did not know you would make their pain a product. He turned to the cameras and to the thousands watching at home. If you want to help, do it honestly. Give without rewriting the person you give to. Let them speak for themselves. Then the final piece landed. Unexpected, smaller, and devastating. Claire played a voicemail she had found while compiling notes, a recording between a Vale executive and a partner firm discussing redirecting a portion of donations to campaign costs and partnership fees. The words were blunt, a structural retainer for distribution channels. The epic generosity advertised was shown to be, in part, repurposed. The crowd's anger shifted from abstract disappointment to outrage. Not only had their sympathies been curated, some of their money had been siphoned as business expense. Vale tried to claw back control, but the tide had turned. People in the crowd stood, some in fury, some in disillusionment. Cameras pulled away from Vale and closed instead on Peter and Agnes and on Daniel. Donations poured not to the foundation, but through direct channels set up on the spot by local community organizers who had come that evening. The producers who remained chose a side. Claire, risking career and more, kept playing truth. Security moved in tight circles, and the director called for a pause as legal teams whispered into phones. Vale, for all his resources, could not unsee what had been shown. The neutral narrator noted the consequence. A man who built an empire on curated goodness found that the foundation of his power was weaker than he had thought. After the cameras were turned off and the lights eased their glare, the group walked out into a night that felt both thinner and clearer. People clustered into small groups on the sidewalk, sharing facts and stories like blankets. Peter's apartment filled quickly with offers. Local businesses promising to help fix the boiler. Neighbors pledging to bring groceries. Strangers from the live stream finding ways to give without a middleman. Daniel sat on the stoop with Ruth's broom propped against the railing. He held Agnes's hand as she rested there, the shawl stitched more firmly around her shoulders now that neighbors had brought extra blankets. He tasted the strange mix of anger and relief. The betrayal had cut him. The truth had, in its own way, healed something raw. The close narrator leaned in, gentle and exact. What matters now is what you do with the broken pieces. Daniel had exposed the lie, but exposure was not salvation. He learned that night that honesty could open doors and also leave rooms empty. The impartial voice added a ledger. The Vale Foundation would face inquiries, sponsors would demand audits, and trust would be expensive to rebuild. But the couple would have the heating fixed without strings, and Michael, small, crumpled, sat nearby, his face a map of shame and tentative reform. Days later, local volunteers set up a community fund with clear accounting and a board that included Peter, Daniel, and Ruth. The stream of donations that once fed a larger machine now fed real, traceable help. Vale faced press and legal calls. Claire, whose decision to release the footage cost her a promotion, gained something else: people's quiet gratitude. In the slow aftermath, Daniel returned to the cafe. He tied the same battered shoelace and smoothed his jacket. The city still smelled of wet earth and the ordinary things that mattered: bread, laundry, the faint perfume of a woman walking past. He served coffee with hands that had learned a hard lesson about how stories can be used and how they can be free. He kept the photograph taped to the suitcase. Some nights he lifted it and let the light from the street lamp touch the faces. He had lost a certain innocence, but he had also found an odd strength. The narrator's final whisper was both warm and cold. Truth asks for courage. Kindness asks for boundaries. The two do not always travel the same road, but both are necessary if people are to be helped without being reshaped. Outside, the city went on: no miracle, no perfect ending, but a new kind of carefulness. People spoke differently now about giving. They asked more questions. They listened more. Daniel walked home one evening with his hands empty and his step steady. The moral of the story did not fit neatly into a sentence. It lived instead as the city's new small rules: tell the truth, protect the voice of the person in need, and remember that the dignity of the given must be guarded as fiercely as the gift itself. The days after the live stream felt like a slow tide pulling back. People who had watched the spectacle found new places to put their anger and their help. The foundation's logo no longer sat comfortable on flyers. It looked cracked. Vale held interviews that sounded practiced and small, and lawyers wrote letters that smelled of printer ink and cold intent. Claire took heat at work and praised the streets. Michael kept his head down and took small jobs, his face a study in regret. Peter and Agnes read the newspapers with hands that trembled, sometimes with anger and sometimes with a kind of shy relief. The house was warmer, and Agnes's cough eased beneath blankets neighbors had brought. Daniel returned to the cafe as if to plant himself back into the ordinary geography of his life. The bell above the door sounded the same, but the people who came and looked at him differently now. Some with new respect, some with the wary suspicion of those who have seen someone in the light and then watched them step into a fight. He tied his battered shoelace with both hands, folded napkins with the same patient care. He made coffee and watched steam rise like small prayers into the air. At night, the city seemed quieter and more honest. Daniel sat on his suitcase and would take the photograph from its tape, place it in his palm, and look at the faces that had once promised a future. He thought of his mother, of the empty rooms she left behind, and of the small kindness that had started the chain of everything. His giving the coin, the old couple's shaky gratitude, the card at his door. He felt proud and ashamed in the same slow way. He had exposed a lie, but he had also let the cameras into a part of people's lives. He had failed to see all the hidden edges at once. That realization made his chest ache with a new kind of hunger, to do good that did not cost someone else their voice. Ruth would not let him be self-flagellating for long. She organized neighborhood meetings at the cafe, where people could speak without a camera and with teacups cooling in their hands. "We are not a story for sale," she said once, and her voice carried through the small room like a bell. "We are people. We help each other because we must." The meetings felt like stitches, small and steady, mending holes the foundation's spectacle had made. They formed a committee that included Daniel, Peter, Ruth, Claire, and a few neighbors who had come forward. They called it plainly the Community Fund. No press, no polished spokespeople. People donated money and time directly. The accounting was open, the decisions public. When someone needed medicine, the fund paid. When a boiler needed fixing, the fund called a neighbor with the right tools. The web of help was local, slow, and human. Daniel found his hands learning new tasks, counting carefully, making lists, balancing need against supply. He felt the work shape him differently than the bright, fast promises Vale's team had offered. It was harder and more honest. Peter took a seat on the committee one day and placed his little notebook on the table. "I want to know the names of the people who help," he said. "I want to be able to say thank you to the man who fixes a pipe and the girl who brings soup. That's enough dignity for me." His voice was small but steady. Agnes, when she remembered, would smile and hand a biscuit to the volunteers, as if gratitude could be measured in crumbs and warmth. Claire, for all the risk she had taken, did not find a grand reward waiting. She lost a promotion, and some doors closed for a while. But people who mattered, neighbors and small journalists, offered her work and company. She came to the cafe often, not to be seen, but to sit and write. In her notebooks, she scribbled careful lists of ways organizations should be held to account. She and Daniel spoke late once, in the quiet after the lamps dimmed. "You did the right thing," she said simply. Daniel wanted to argue the point until his throat ran dry. "I exposed them," he said. "But I also let them in. I let the cameras get to them. I put a spotlight on Agnes when she did not ask for one." Claire sipped her coffee. "You are learning," she said. "That's how it is. You won't always get it right. What matters is that you keep listening to the people you help. Let them speak. That is what dignity asks." Her words were not absolution, but they were a map. At night, when the city hummed with the distant whir of cars and the occasional shout, Daniel walked the streets to hand out soup with neighbors. The work was simple: ladle, cup, a warm word. He watched people's faces, some tired, some relieved, and felt small and large at once. He thought about the way stories could be used, how a camera could make a life into an image, and how, in the end, the image could forget the person it came from. He visited Michael, sometimes. The neighbor who had planted the photograph worked to make small amends. He volunteered at the community fund and fixed bicycles in exchange for food. They did not shake hands the first few times, but one evening Michael handed Daniel a repaired radio, and Daniel nodded. "You did wrong," Daniel said quietly. Michael's face was open in shame and humility. "I know," he said. "I traded dignity for money. I am trying to pay it back not because I think I can erase it, but because I have to live with what I did." The words were small and true. Daniel felt anger and also a hard, cautious hope. The moral of what had been done returned to him in different forms. Once, while writing a ledger for the fund, he paused and thought of all the voices that had been nearly lost. Peter's careful baritone, Agnes's soft laughter, Michael's thin jokes. He realized that charity without consent was theft dressed as kindness. Representation without permission was a kind of violence. He learned that exposure could correct, but could also scar if wielded without care. Most of all, he learned that power lay in the quiet shape of listening. Months passed. The fund stabilized. The boiler got fixed. Agnes's cough was mostly gone during the day, and she remembered names more often than she forgot them. Peter took to writing letters to people who had helped, and he made sure to add a small note of thanks to every hand that fixed a leak or brought a blanket. Vale's name receded from everyday gossip. Audits and accusations took time and noise. He still had allies, but the bright sheen had dulled. Daniel kept the photograph taped to his suitcase and slept with his window cracked so the city could sing him awake. In the quiet, he would sometimes think of what it meant to give and to be seen. The question did not resolve neatly. He had no sweeping epiphany. He changed by small degrees. He listened more, spoke less for others. And when he told a story, he asked permission first. One evening, when Agnes pressed a biscuit into his palm and Peter stood with the notebook balanced on his knee, Daniel sat and spoke softly. "I thought once that kindness alone could solve everything," he said. "But I've learned it is not enough. Kindness must be paired with respect. It must not take the name of the person it helps and turn it into profit." Agnes smiled the way she always had, the warmth of a woman who had been loved for years showing in the slow lift of her mouth. "You helped us," she said simply. "You stood with us. That is enough." The narrator, part close, part distant, offered the final small truth. Acts matter, and so does the way they are done. A life can be remedied without being rewritten. A story can be told without stealing the voice of the one who lived it. Daniel did not become a saint. He kept his faults like small stones in his pocket to remind him of the weight of choice. When winter came again and the city's breath was small and white, Daniel walked by the cafe and saw lights in Peter and Agnes's window. He heard laughter, not staged, but real and ragged. He carried a tray of coffee and placed a cup in front of Ruth, who winked at him with a secret that had to do with brooms and stubborn kindness. He placed his photograph back on the suitcase, touched the faces lightly, and closed the lid. He had helped and he had hurt. In those two truths lived the honest work of being human. He had learned to keep people's voices safe. That learning was his small, ongoing redemption. The city moved forward, imperfect and alive, and Daniel walked with it, wiser, more careful, and finally willing to hold his hand steady not for applause, but for the simple, fierce purpose of keeping a promise to those who had trusted him. Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like it, share it with your friends, and subscribe to the channel for more meaningful stories. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.